He is the strongest warrior of the Shadow Angels. Due to their repeated failures to invade the human world, he personally controls cherubim to descend to Earth. Could humanity lose its last sanctuary? Just recently, humans discovered a feather encased in amber under the sea. Rena speculated that it dates back 12,000 years. The commander conjectured that by thoroughly researching this feather, they might find a way to counter the Shadow Angels. Thus, June's vacation was ruined, as he had to rush back to analyze the feather. Unexpectedly, Toma sensed the feather and realized its seal was broken. The higher echelons of the Shadow Angels, upon learning this, were determined to reclaim it, insisting it must not be tainted by humans. In the human research lab, the moment they extracted the feather, Sirius suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest, while Rena began talking to herself. After inspecting the feather, the commander seemed to recognize its original owner and issued an order that no one should touch it. Meanwhile, still affected by his earlier sensation, Sirius locked himself in his room. Sylvia tried to comfort him but was driven away. It wasn't really what he intended. He seemed to be suppressing something, but Sylvia didn't know the truth and left feeling very sad. At that moment, Apollo appeared out of nowhere, persuading her to go see the feather. The more the commander forbade it, the more curious he became, thinking it might even help rescue Baron. Sylvia, wanting to distract herself, agreed to his suggestion. Unbeknownst to them, Toma, seemingly aware of Apollo's thoughts, went to the Tree of Life and retrieved Baron, apparently plotting something sinister. At the same time, Apollo and Sylvia quietly sneaked into the storage room. Apollo used his sense of smell to evade the infrared sensors at the door, while Sylvia used her abilities to unlock the device. Apollo picked up the feather inside and found its scent somewhat familiar, as if he had smelled it somewhere before. But before he could remember, an image of a bloodied wing suddenly flashed in his mind, followed by a sharp pain in his back. Sylvia touched him and also saw the wings. The next second, both were transported into a shared consciousness space where they regained their past life memories. Solar Wing was once a fearsome angel of slaughter who fell in love with Celiane, a human. This forbidden love across species led to the harshest punishment for Apollonius. Celiane, trying to save him, broke into the Shadow Angel's stronghold only to be captured by Maroha. Just as she was about to be executed, Solar Wing broke his wings to shield her from the attack. As wings are a symbol of honor for Shadow Angels, this act signified rebellion against his own kind. However, Apollonius and Celiane, piloting a mechanical angel, were invincible on the battlefield. Just then, their memories were abruptly cut off as a shrill alarm sounded throughout the base, summoning all pilots to the command center. Cherubim had appeared again, targeting the Deva organization's base this time. Toma personally controlled Cherubim, breaking through the barrier and entering. Human weapons had no effect on it. Now, all hope rested on the Archangel. Toma had always loved Solar Wing and came to Earth to reunite with the reincarnation of Apollonius. However, Apollo was not entirely Apollonius, and Toma's confession was incomprehensible to him. Thus, Toma decided to end it there and yanked Apollo into the air, smashing him against the barrier behind them. Seeing the Archangel powerless, the command center retrieved him back into the barrier. Unexpectedly, Toma then produced Baron. Apollo tried to rescue Baron but was blocked by the barrier. Baron also stopped him from coming closer, revealing that his cage was a bomb set to explode if Apollo approached. But Apollo didn't care. Baron was his most important friend. Pierre also supported his decision, and together they unleashed a fiery punch that broke through the barrier and retrieved Baron. Just then, Reika sensed an ominous sign. As Apollo opened the cage, it exploded, completely shattering the final barrier and putting all of humanity at risk for the sake of one life. Such an event would never have happened under Sirius's control, but now it was too late for regrets. The commander stood up to inspire everyone, asserting that those who abandon their friends are not needed. There was still hope. Apollo might still be able to defeat Toma, but the next second, Baron turned to ashes in the Archangel's hands, leaving Apollo overwhelmed with grief and helplessness. Pierre urged Apollo to rally, suggesting that Baron would want him to seek revenge. Pierre's words had an effect. An angry Apollo erupted with a chilling energy. Everyone could clearly see the Archangel crying. In a scene reminiscent of history, Apollo even broke his own arms, a sight Toma viewed as disgraceful. Toma instructed Otoha to control Cherubim and went off to search for the feather himself. The base detected an invasion by Shadow Angels and immediately informed Apollo inside the Archangel. Unexpectedly, he chased after them, followed closely by Sylvia, causing the Archangel to disintegrate. The deputy commander suggested a retreat, but Fudo had another plan, sending Reika and Tsugumi to pilot the fighters. Inside the base, Toma arrived at the storage room. Apollo, although quick to arrive, was no match for Toma. At that moment, Sirius also appeared and struck Toma with the Sword of the Heart. Toma was surprised to find such nobility among humans, but it was still insufficient. Eventually, Sylvia was also captured. Even as Apollo broke free and lunged at Toma, it had no effect, and Toma mocked him for being unable to save his friends. However, Toma offered to resurrect Baron, but at the cost of sacrificing Sirius and Sylvia's lives, Apollo immediately refused. Toma activated the psychic equipment on Sirius and Sylvia, from which several feathers fell out. Toma declared that Sirius and Sylvia, like them, inherited wings and were descendants of Solar Wing and Celiane. Still, Apollo was unmoved. They were his companions, and he would not fall for Toma's tricks. Given this, Toma planned to make Apollo reincarnate again. On the other side, Reika, Pierre, and Tsugumi recombined into Luna Archangel. Otoha, hearing the voice of a woman, became unusually excited and attacked the Archangel. Initially, she overwhelmed the Archangel with no resistance, but for some reason, when the background music began, the Archangel immediately turned the tide. Just as the Archangel was preparing to launch its final move, Otoha saw a mysterious projection and then teleported away in the head unit. Toma also sensed something. An unexpected explosion occurred behind him, burning the feather to ashes. He then spared everyone and left the area. Toma's decision to let them go was ultimately because of his deep love for Solar Wing. However, failing to retrieve the feather led to a severe judgment within his clan. Moroha speculated that Toma still harbored feelings for Solar Wing. Otherwise, how could he explain why he had the wings mounted on his helmet? This was why Otoha, upon leaving, risked everything to take the helmet with her. Toma even rewarded her with a kiss. Facing Moroha's accusations, Toma stated that this reminder of Solar Wing's foolish decisions was necessary. But to the elders, these matters were of little concern. They were more interested in how humans had nurtured Solar Wing. Although he was still weak, they wondered if he could eventually pollinate the Tree of Life's flowers. If he lacked the power to foster a new world, they would have to ruthlessly cut him off. Meanwhile, Sylvia had a nightmare where she became Apollo and witnessed some of his childhood experiences. However, the appearance of Toma pulled her back to reality. She now understood the importance of Baron in Apollo's heart and worried that his death might deeply affect Apollo. Sophia comforted her, confident that Apollo could overcome the grief, as they had all done before. Just then, Sylvia's attention was drawn to a painting of an eagle. She recalled the broken wings, and Sophia speculated that the two had encountered that particular feather. Apollo might have seen his past life's memories, but these might not necessarily be true. Even the records in the sacred book might be false. The feather of a shadow angel contained special powers, and the one Apollo touched held information from 12,000 years ago. He might have mistaken this information for his own memories. Another theory was that Apollo had already accepted Sylvia, so under the influence of the feather, he saw Sylvia's memories. This would also explain why Sylvia saw Apollo's memories in her dream. Their repeated unions, both physically and mentally, had allowed them to start sharing feelings and memories. However, before Sylvia could gather her thoughts, Cherubim attacked a human city again. Reika, June, and Pierre went out to confront it, but strangely, they could not see the enemy. It seemed this cherubim could become invisible. The trio had to merge first, and then search for the enemy. However, Reika's senses could not locate it. After struggling, they got a chance by being hit, only to find that cherubim could also split itself. At this point, they had no choice but to switch with June as the head, using his ability to find the enemy's location. Since June was inexperienced as head, he wasn't very skilled yet, but his ability was truly effective in clearly capturing Cherubim's presence. The biggest issue was that he couldn't keep up with the enemy's speed, which embarrassed everyone. Fudo scolded them, questioning if they hadn't noticed June's courage as he bravely faced his fears and fought against the enemy. Were they really mocking their own teammate? Despite this, the Archangel was still dispersed by Cherubim. At that moment, Apollo found Baron's headband, and fueled by grief and anger, volunteered to go into battle. Fudo ordered a full swap. Apollo, Sylvia, and Sirius were transported to the battlefield and merged into Sol Archangel. This time, their emotions were even more intense than before. but they still couldn't see the enemy and were left to take hits. Moreover, Sylvia was confused about whether her brother or Apollo was the reincarnation of Solar Wing. As she grappled with this, Cherubim hit Apollo's position, making him appear to vanish. Everyone was stunned, unaware that this was another of Thoma's schemes. Those without wings only believe what they see and feel fear towards the unseen, thus falling into a mental darkness. Sophia still had some sense left. If Apollo had disappeared, the Archangel would have disintegrated, but it hadn't, so Apollo must still be there, just invisible to their eyes. At this moment, Sylvia found Baron's headband, which stirred her emotions. She seemed to understand her feelings. Subconsciously, she had already accepted Apollo, and this had nothing to do with past lives but was purely about their connection in this life. Chinese characters are truly remarkable. Even 12,000 years later, humanity still regards them as miraculous. Even a simple character can elude complete understanding despite a lifetime of study. Just recently, Pierre received a letter from his hometown. His first love is getting married to his brother, stirring complex emotions in him. Only through constant fighting can he temporarily let go of these feelings. However, the more he merges in battle, the more energized Pierre feels, until he is completely drained. Once rested, the emotions resurface. Apollo, noticing Pierre's off condition, tries to provoke him from behind, but to no effect. Pierre is distracted even during lessons, and everyone notices his unusual behavior. Rena says that he is broken down as a person, suffering from merging dependency due to his unresolved feelings for his first love. His hormone release is twice that of an average person, leading to a complete mental breakdown and rendering him incapacitated. To prevent his condition from worsening, they confine him. Unfortunately, Cherubim attacks Pierre's hometown this time, and this Cherubim can shift its weak points, making Apollo, Sylvia, and June's combined form no match for it. The deputy commander then allows the reserves to take turns in battle, but they still cannot alter the outcome. By this time, Pierre is desperately eager, but he is locked in solitary confinement. Allowing him another merge would definitely incapacitate him. The next second, Fudo opens the room, gives Pierre a profound lecture, and then disappears. Pierre seizes the opportunity, leaves the room, and rushes into the fighter transfer pod. He is beyond reasoning. If defeat is inevitable, he wants to merge one last time, especially since his family is in the city. Thus, Pierre, Apollo, and Sirius merge into Mars Archangel. Pierre kicked Cherubim into outer space like a soccer ball, but exhausted, he collapsed and fell into a coma. The right action would have been to disassemble and rescue him, but Fudo stopped the deputy commander, arguing that a person can only stand up again after completely falling down. At this moment, a part of him hoped for support. Apollo and Sirius saw the flame in his heart and supported him with a resolve to do or die. Fudo explained that Chinese characters, when simply combined, take on different meanings. At this moment, Pierre also evolved. Even seeing his first love below did not disturb him. It was time to say goodbye to the past. Now, he had a new support as teammates. Heartbreak indeed fosters growth. Pierre finally rediscovered himself and offered his first love sincere well wishes. Fighter pilots collectively exhibited symptoms of anemia because Rena had drunk the blood of almost everyone. People suspected her true identity might be a vampire, possibly even a spy from the Shadow Angels, infiltrating the base to dismantle them from within. Suddenly, conspiracy theories about Rena being a vampire spread throughout the base. However, songs don't lie, and Rena's singing was filled with sorrow. Sylvia felt she was not evil, but found it suspicious that Rena used an umbrella during the day. Rena claimed she was sensitive to sunlight and left without further explanation. Could she really be a vampire? Without resolving this doubt, Sylvia couldn't sleep. So, at midnight, she quietly explored Rena's room and found an old photo under the table with Rena right in the center. Judging by the photo's wear, it was at least 50 years old, yet she still looked like a child. Lost in thought, Sylvia didn't notice Rena standing behind her. Sylvia instinctively explained she was just checking on her, but Rena left the room without making things difficult. Meanwhile, an energy reaction occurred on the other side of the Earth. Apollo, June, and Sylvia immediately headed to the scene only to be stunned upon arrival. The entire city was covered in dark clouds and Cherubim was nowhere to be seen. June felt uneasy. The next second, A mass of purple liquid transformed into a human form, revealing a vampire that looked exactly like Reyna. With Rena missing from the base, they couldn't help but suspect this vampire was Rena. Sylvia was confused. Rena was their ally, and thinking this made her unable to act. Just like that, the Archangel was dismantled by the vampire. At that moment, Apollo's intuition kicked in. He declared that the vampire was not Rena. The real Rena was hiding. Apollo shouted her name towards the sky, and possibly due to the awakening of her bloodline powers, Rena teleported right in front of Apollo. He embraced her, and they initiated a 4-person merge. Initially caught off guard, they were successfully ambushed by the vampire. Rena became weak, but Apollo offered his neck for her to drink his blood. Subsequently, the Archangel unleashed a powerful energy, dispersing the dark clouds instantly and letting sacred sunlight fall upon the earth. The Archangel formed a silver needle and drove it into the vampire's body, quickly annihilating it with holy power. Fudo explained that everyone has darkness within them, and their fear of Reyna had manifested the cherubim. Indeed, Reyna had been acting strangely. During every full moon, she couldn't remember her actions and found herself feeding on blood. They now understood that Reyna's abilities were not only foresight and illusions, but also teleportation and energy concentration. The only drawback was that these powers required blood to activate, meaning only Apollo, with his abundant blood supply, could readily meet her needs. This woman's singing could reboot the earth, transforming a withered, rotting world into an oasis in an instant, and even revive the dead. Science stands defeated before her. Just now, Tsugumi was shocked to find herself 100 grams heavier and felt as if the sky had fallen. To lose weight, she dared only eat vegetable salads. Sylvia tried to tempt her with fried chicken but ended up being persuaded to join the dieting ranks. Like most people, they aim to achieve their goals through exercise and dieting. How to handle the stress of wanting to eat but not being able to. Mutual monitoring was the best method. If all else fails, they could even seal themselves away. However, over time, they would fall into a pathological state that of dreaming. What they couldn't have in reality, they could extravagantly indulge in dreams. However, this also made them most vulnerable, allowing the shadow angels to see through their dreams. Taking advantage of the human need to eat, they released a microbial version of cherubim. While everyone was asleep, it sneaked into the human base and devoured all the food. Apollo smelled something strange, but by the time he realized what was happening, he saw that even the rats had started to flee. On the other side, Sylvia was suddenly awakened by hunger. She sleepily opened her collection of snacks, only to find they had all turned into useless paper. Others faced the same situation. The biggest problem now was that all the food in the base's warehouse had vanished. Crops in the fields were withered, and livestock in the pastures had disappeared. They had completely lost their food supply. As they felt bewildered, someone discovered micron-sized holes in the vacuum packaging of the emergency food supplies, suggesting that microbes digesting the food were to blame, likely cherubim. At the same time, global food supply convoys were also attacked. A week later, people faced a massive survival challenge. They could only temporarily relieve hunger by drinking water, but if this continued, humanity would be doomed. Fudo decided to take the offensive. However, how could they find the enemy? Sylvia, Reika, and Tsugumi stepped up. Due to days without food, their chests had shrunk to half their size. Now was the time to defend their dignity, and they were confident they could do it. Indeed, desperate women are the most formidable creatures in the world. They merged into an archangel, but with little strength, they could barely stand, let alone search for the enemy. The commander said that people feel hungry because they think they should eat. If they could overcome the perception of hunger, their true strength would emerge. Historically, when humans ran out of food, their consciousness would awaken and their senses become sharper. Now was their time of awakening. Although cherubim had destroyed the food, it would still carry the scent of the food. Smell was Apollo's strength. He dove into Sylvia's cockpit, sniffing around like a dog. Being in a merged state, they all shared the experience. In the next instant, they simultaneously discovered cherubim's hiding place and unleashed all their pent-up resentment. However, the crisis was not over yet. Just when everyone thought they were going to win, cherubim transformed into smoke and engulfed the Archangel. The smoke seemed to have corrosive properties, and the Archangel was gradually being devoured. This was what food feels like when humans eat it. The Shadow Angels wanted humans to experience this pain. Yet Reyna found the sound of being consumed rather pleasant. Her body emitted a bright light, and then teleported to the battlefield. Everyone felt despair, but the commander heard singing. This was Reina's masterpiece. The devoured body of the Archangel was transforming into nutrients for the earth. Everything in nature is interdependent. Life and death are part of an endless cycle. Since the Archangel was revived, Cherubim naturally disappeared. The Elder Lion suddenly realized that this might be what Toma had mentioned about the solar wing, enabling the Tree of Life to evolve again. Japanese anime from 20 years ago is still the world's #1 today. It appeals not just to children but also challenges one's math skills and offers unparalleled insights into life. Just now, after harvest beasts attacked humans, they escaped in front of Apollo, Sylvia, and Sirius. The three started blaming each other. To promote team harmony, Fudo had them roleplay as each other to better understand one another. They would portray whoever they most resembled internally. Thus, Reika and Sylvia swapped roles, and so did Apollo and Sirius. However, as they acted, they mixed up their targets. Reika seized the opportunity to rush towards the real Sirius. Sylvia felt uneasy seeing Reika approach her brother, but her jealousy soared when Reika hugged Apollo. Seeing a rare chance to vent, Apollo got carried away. He mimicked Sirius's typically aloof demeanor and then, merging it with his own character, swallowed a rose. Following this, Sirius, pretending to be the laid-back Apollo, sniffed around him. Everyone gasped, surprised that Sirius was the most convincing. Apollo then immediately became serious again. Just then, Reina suddenly stood up, leaving everyone shocked. Before they could recover, Reina pointed out their problem. Their impersonations were only superficial, and internally, they still retained their original selves. Then, she demonstrated the right way to do it. To everyone's surprise, Reina transformed into Fudo. It turned out that the Reina they saw earlier was actually Fudo in disguise. Apollo couldn't understand where they had gone wrong. Sophia worried that this might be too profound for the children. They were just mimicking the surface feelings. Was it too soon to let them confront their inner shadows? Fudo wasn't concerned. She underestimated the children's rate of growth. They were unraveling the secret of the 3 arrows. When they fully became the most difficult person to get along with, the 3 arrows would reveal their immense form. Sophia was somewhat impressed but puzzled. Meanwhile, Sirius entered the forest alone, seeking to experience what Apollo felt when hunting. Sylvia and Reika waited outside. Unexpectedly, Reika suddenly transformed into Sylvia. Then, sensing an ominous presence, Sylvia dashed into the forest. The next second, she was caught in a spider web, truly becoming as unfortunate as Reika. At the same time, Apollo entered Sirius's study. The setup inside seemed somewhat pretentious. Then, he found a set of photos in a corner, still carrying the scent of a fire. At that moment, Apollo truly became serious, even accessing his past memories. While everyone was immersed in each other's roles, an alarm suddenly sounded at the base. Apollo, Sirius, and Sylvia went out to confront the enemy. However, this time the enemy was different from before. Cherubim had transformed into angelic fighter jets, looking like mirror images. If the enemy had attacked earlier, they would have been caught off guard. But now, the trio had not yet stepped out of their roles, and they failed to merge before the battle even started. The reason was simple. Imitation is just that, imitation. Even if one can empathize deeply with another, it is not the same as being oneself. Only a clear understanding of one's identity can lead to true awakening. Thus, the trio stopped playing cosplay, and instead came to understand each other's core. Not only could they merge easily, but their power also reached epic proportions, and their sizes increased several times over. This was the immense form Fudo had spoken about. The 3 arrows, when directed in the same direction, would break under a strong force, but when aimed in different directions, they would not break. However, Sophia had a doubt. If everyone is scattered in different directions, it wouldn't be effective. Fudo explained that this was only the appearance, but if the 3 arrows found a point that allowed them to combine, the outcome would be different. This point was the Archangel. The 3 fighter jets transcended dimensions and created a massive 3-dimensional shape, becoming their current form. Cherubim, on the other hand, merely imitated. Such a simplistic approach was doomed to fail. This is the boldest experiment in anime history. 1 second, the animation is lifelike, and the next, it shifts to rough sketches. This change isn't because the production team ran out of money, but because they were attacked and dragged into a false inner world. Inside, the trio first encountered a harvest beast, but in an instant, the beast transformed into a little girl. Apollo was utterly confused, and no one could answer his questions since Sylvia and Reika had disappeared. Just as he was at a loss, Rena suddenly appeared beside him, stating that this place reflects the darkness within one's heart. Before Apollo could organize his thoughts, Rena turned into Reika. Reika then began to explain about the solar wing, revealing that it was originally part of the angelic forces but chose to betray them to join humans. Then Reika transformed into Tsugumi, who claimed that the solar wing did so because of love for humans. Apollo already knew this. What he wanted now was to find out how to leave this place. He then rushed toward a distant tower. On the other side, Sylvia couldn't find Apollo either. To her despair, everything here defied common sense, even making her feel like they were caged animals, unable to escape their deepest fears. Fortunately, Sirius found her. Unfazed by the unknown, he deduced that they must have been intercepted during a teleportation, landing in this world through a disrupted subspace channel. After investigating, he discovered the city was conducting heresy trials. They needed to hide their identities and prioritize finding their companions. Luckily, they spotted Reika in a tree. Unfortunately, Reika accidentally tore off Sirius's cloak, exposing his hidden flaws to the sunlight. With the three of them together, Sirius decided not to continue searching for Apollo. They could merge into one and defeat Cherubim to regain their original forms. Unbeknownst to them, Apollo had already reached the tower, where a boy he once knew blocked his path. Apollo tried to take him along, but the boy revealed he was no longer human and had become part of the Tree of Life. Apollo didn't care. A companion is always a companion. Suddenly, the boy disappeared. He was actually Futaba from the Shadow Angels in disguise. Meanwhile, the trio transformed into Archangel Mars and struck at the tower. Unexpectedly, a cherubim blocked their attack, controlled by the powerful Toma. Instead of using force, Toma attempted to brainwash Sirius, telling him that the feathers in his body would never allow him to be accepted by humans. Just then, Sirius heard Apollo's shout, which strengthened his resolve. Sylvia and Reika felt the same. The three looked towards the distant tower, saw Apollo above, and their spirits were reignited. Indeed, a companion is always a companion. Their belief is never to abandon or give up. The three immediately regained their colors and caught Apollo. The boy looked panicked, lying on the autopsy table with a face full of terror. However, he does not deserve sympathy, as he is a butcher from another race, responsible for the massacre of countless humans. This was the first time in human history that a living Shadow Angel was captured. Such an act completely infuriated the Shadow Angels, prompting them to launch a final massive assault. Today was supposed to be the day Baron named Apollo, so he was indulging in a feast. But reminiscing about time spent with friends left him utterly heartbroken. Just then, Cherubim launched an attack on humans. Unlike previous captures, it was now wreaking havoc on human civilization, turning the entire city into a fiery hell. People screamed and fled in all directions. Fortunately, the mechanical archangel arrived just in time. However, everyone was puzzled as to why Cherubim was on a killing spree. Fudu pointed out the difficulty of the situation, noting that this attack was aimless, merely Futaba's mischief. Moroha and others were troubled, wondering what would happen if humanity, serving as energy for the Tree of Life, was completely depleted. The Great Elder, however, felt it was irrelevant. As a child, Futaba should be allowed to be willful. At that moment, Apollo and Sirius suddenly heard the sound of wings, leaving them puzzled, but they didn't dwell on it. They launched an attack on Cherubim, which unexpectedly retreated instead of fighting and chose to self-destruct. The harsh sound of wings was heard again, causing Apollo to feel irritated. However, Cherubim continued to avoid direct conflict and opted for self-destruction after dodging. This time, they clearly heard a child's voice, which seemed out of place on a battlefield. Rena and Jun used their abilities to trace the origin of the sound. Rena realized this was a slaughter without murderous intent, while June felt a hand clutching feathers. The situation on the battlefield was one-sided, as Cherubim kept self-destructing. Sylvia grew increasingly agitated until Cherubim launched a surprise attack. Fortunately, Apollo reacted swiftly and defeated the opponent. Meanwhile, a green light was seen weaving through the Cherubim, appearing to be the core. Suppressing this light seemed to immobilize the Cherubim. Under the moonlight, Futaba revealed his true form. To their surprise, the one behind all the mischief was a child. Faced with such an adversary, Sylvia's maternal instincts kicked in. Apollo, however, saw things more clearly. Evil knows no age, and they were also children once. The Shadow Angel who took Baron was right before them, and he could not forgive. Apollo never expected that excessive kindness wasn't just characteristic of Sylvia, but of everyone else as well. The base dispatched capture planes to apprehend Futaba alive, emphasizing to Apollo and the others to flank from both sides and avoid causing harm. Apollo felt agonized. His teammates were overly kind. Futaba never regarded humans as equals, treating murder as a gamma cognitive issue. So, Apollo decided not to be influenced by others and confronted Futaba in his own way. However, Sylvia reminded him that Futaba was just a child, which frustrated Apollo. Can a child do anything they want? In his anger, Apollo slapped Futaba away. Before he could continue his pursuit, the capture system apprehended Futaba. At this time, everyone was concerned about how the higher-ups would deal with Futaba, possibly using him for experiments, which seemed too cruel. They began to waver, questioning what the long-term battle was really for. Fudu neither supported nor opposed their thoughts, noting that humans and shadow angels have always been akin, but shadow angels never considered human intelligence or emotions, thus hunting humans as ecological energy. Now, the roles were reversed, with Futaba becoming the prey, filled with fear. Sylvia and Sirius heard his cries for help, but Apollo had heard them all along. Was Apollo not also suffering? Yet, he held firm to his beliefs. Showing mercy to an enemy is cruelty to oneself. Just then, the voices in their minds suddenly stopped because Futaba was being dissected for research. All the shadow angels sensed this and were grief-stricken. The irony of their anger was almost laughable. The treatment Futaba received was no different from what they had always done to humans. How could they feel it was excessive when it happened to one of their own? But, considering themselves superior beings, they lacked empathy. They decided to avenge Futaba by uniting their entire race. A great battle was looming. The shadow angels opened a red path, and both Sirius and Apollo felt a calling. At that moment, Sirius questioned the path he was on and sought Reika's opinion on what she would do if she found out a friend was a shadow angel. Reika said she would fight regardless of who the other person was. As the shadow angels had harmed everyone important to her, she couldn't forgive them. This wasn't the answer Sirius was hoping for. Back in his room, Sylvia came to him, saying she had a nightmare about her brother going far away and never returning. Little did she know, Sirius was indeed contemplating leaving. The next day, Sophia shared a secret about an ancient red path that connected to the sky. Solar Wing had once sided with humans using this path. Now, it was calling again. However, Apollo didn't feel a strong pull. Unlike Sirius, who seemed deeply troubled, Sirius suggested testing their swordsmanship on the path. The one who fell would lose. Apollo lost his footing and fell, but Sirius didn't take advantage of the situation. Just then, an enemy attack alarm sounded, halting their duel. Sirius, Sylvia, and Apollo flew towards the battlefield, but before they could see the enemy, chaos erupted at the base due to the detection of a very powerful enemy energy. It seemed another direct attack by the Shadow Angels was imminent. Just then, a dark cherubim descended upon Earth, imposing a great sense of oppression. Not only that, Sirius also saw extreme beauty in it, but the more beautiful something is, the more deadly it can be. The one controlling this cherubim was Toma, who had ulterior motives for coming here. Everyone suspected he was here to take Apollo away. Sylvia, recalling her nightmare, completely lost her will to fight. Fudu urgently had Reika swap places with her, but everyone was mistaken. Toma's real goal was to brainwash Sirius. The dissection of Futaba had left a deep scar on Sirius, making him see that humans and shadow angels had committed similar wrongs. To achieve a beautiful dream of a war-free era, which humans couldn't accomplish, he chose the side of the shadow angels. He pretended to fight alongside Toma while actually opening his heart to him. Taking the opportunity, Toma opened the red path. In the final moments, Sirius disintegrated and followed Toma into it. Reika tried to use their mutual love to stop Sirius from leaving, but Sirius revealed his wings. Reika hesitated momentarily, and due to this brief retreat, Sirius's confusion cleared. He fully embraced the cause of the Shadow Angels, believing that only by taking this path could he achieve his ideals. Sirius's betrayal of humanity completely changed the dynamic between the races. However, seeing him flirt with Toma annoyed Otoha. She went to the elders to complain, but the Grand Elder did not care. They had just lost a child, and the 10 flowers on the Tree of Life were their last hope. Now, letting them grow was more important than anything else. Meanwhile, human leaders had issued new orders. If the Mars fighter jet was not reclaimed, Fudu would be dismissed. But Fudu didn't take it seriously and stayed in his room, fiddling with tea leaves. Sophia had always wondered why the base was built on the ruins of the royal family and what Sirius and Sylvia were hiding. However, Fudu offered to take her to the ruins to discover the truth. It turned out that the base concealed items from before the royal family's destruction. The city Shangri-La, the ancient capital of humanity 12,000 years ago, and the statues in front of them were built by Solar Wing and Celiane, who had provided humanity with the means to combat the Shadow Angels. However, cultivating archangels required powerful earth forces, which led to the tragic fate of Sirius and Sylvia's family. Both of them had Shadow Angel wings, indicating they were descendants of Solar Wing and Celiane. This was the first time Sylvia had been separated from her brother. Distraught, she could only reminisce about the past through photographs, similar to Reika's situation. Rika felt that both Glenn and Sirius's misfortunes were caused by her own misfortune. Apollo, however, had a different view. Sirius was simply foolish for caring too much about trivial matters. Seeing Apollo so composed, could it be that he always knew Sirius's secret about having wings? Apollo was even more puzzled. Is doing nothing also wrong? It was then that Reika realized that the unfortunate choose their own misfortune, shaped by their self-imposed situations. Just then, Sylvia's wrist suddenly lit up. Apollo smelled a familiar scent and ran out. Sylvia was awakened by Sirius's voice, who wanted to take her away with him. At the last moment, Apollo burst in, thwarting Sirius and Toma's plot. Otoha worried about what would happen if Sirius betrayed them again, but Toma was confident, declaring he would always stand by their side because it was humans who had abandoned him. It seemed they truly believed Sirius was the reincarnation of Solar Wing. To retrieve Sylvia, they launched another attack on Earth, this time led by Sirius himself. Regretting her previous actions, Reika thought an apology might change Sirius's mind. Unexpectedly, Sirius fired a missile at her, shooting her down. Moreover, his Mars fighter jet merged with a cherubim to become the Mars Shadow Angel, stunning everyone. Sirius felt elevated and claimed he could defeat Apollo in 3 seconds. At that moment, Apollo was defenseless, but Sirius did not deliver a killing blow. He wanted them to witness how he would destroy humanity. He gathered destructive energy to strike at his former teammates. But the next second, 3 unfamiliar fighter jets flew towards him. Sirius had to turn around to deal with them first. The deputy commander revealed that these were archangels developed by the military. However, Sirius scorned them as ugly creations. The human leaders had harmed angels and their own comrades to create such war machines. Seeing the pilot of the new archangel, Reika lost all will to fight because it was her former teammate, Glenn, now transformed into a grotesque hybrid. This was a cruel human experiment. The human leaders transplanted Shadow Angel wings onto Glenn, but he couldn't control the power of the Shadow Angel. Therefore, a control system was implanted in Glenn's body, turning him into an emotionless killing machine. The people at the base realized they had been too naive before, but the deputy commander disagreed. He viewed it as scientific progress, enhancing human capabilities through the use of alien species. Thus, the new Archangel only needed one pilot. Glenn, controlling the mech, fired at Sirius. Reika tried to persuade them to stop, but her words were ineffective. Sirius charged at Glenn with his sword, but unexpectedly, the new Archangel could disassemble and reassemble in just 2.2 seconds. It had completely surpassed human limits, and its attacks were relentless. A massive explosion engulfed Sirius, but he emerged unscathed and instantly appeared in front of Glenn. Glenn punched him away, and then launched a barrage of missiles. The battle between them had escalated intensely. Reika was utterly shocked. The two were supposed to be the most important comrades, yet here they were, engaged in a senseless fight. Glenn was deaf to her words as he unleashed his strongest attack. On the other side, Otoha felt the pain of Futaba's wings being used for evil, as did Toma. However, the deputy commander believed this to be humanity's proudest creation. With 10 more such weapons, he argued, human victory was assured. Fudo countered that no amount of such devices would be useful if humans did not abandon their foolishness. Indeed, the half-destroyed Mars Shadow Angel rose again, and Sirius began calling out to Sylvia, condemning human sins as unforgivable. He argued that humans would sacrifice even their comrades for victory, and that staying with them would only turn them into experimental subjects. Sylvia had no time to think, as Sirius was already in danger. She attempted a forced transfer but unexpectedly ended up in the new fighter jet. The deputy commander ordered Glenn to stop Sylvia from leaving, indifferent to the possibility of her being shot down. Glenn's attack on Sylvia, however, provided Sirius with an opportunity to disrupt Glenn's merged state. With no more obstacles, Sylvia was finally about to reunite with her brother. At that moment, Apollo intervened, determined not to let Sylvia leave, and forcibly merged with Reika and Sylvia. The spectators were stunned, questioning how any 3 fighter jets could merge, but this did not stop Sirius. With the Cherubim, he could keep fighting. Then Sirius played the emotional card to brainwash Sylvia. Reika and Apollo intended to interrupt him, but their winged bond made it impossible for others to intervene. Seeing Sylvia's wings, the base personnel also began to waver. Sirius took this chance to launch a fierce verbal assault on Sylvia, claiming that their wings combined could allow them to fly freely. But at the last moment, Apollo appeared again. Sirius didn't take him seriously, mocking those without wings as unworthy of dreams. Sylvia, already conflicted, hesitated more after hearing her brother's words. His superior attitude was not the fairness he often proclaimed. She suddenly realized that her wingless hand was meant to unite with someone important. At that moment, she chose Apollo, indifferent to the fact that she couldn't fly. Seeing this, Sirius decided to eliminate Apollo first and then forcibly take her away. Sylvia chose to fight back, not for the sake of battle, but to foster mutual understanding between the siblings once again. Thus, the 3 of them developed a new move together. Ever since Sirius joined the Shadow Angels, the world's balance was disrupted. New cherubim emerged from the Tree of Life, capable of bringing the harvest snow to Earth, allowing them to collect human life energy without deploying troops. As time passed, the number of space portals gradually increased. The most problematic issue was that humans had no idea how to resist. It felt like the apocalypse had arrived, leaving them to silently await their fate. Sylvia was devastated by her brother's unforgivable sins. She wanted to use the space portals to bring Sirius back, but she couldn't overcome the barrier. However, the deputy commander suspected Sylvia of wanting to defect and thus banned her from piloting fighter jets. Fortunately, her teammates supported her. Fudo then commented that the situation resembled the moment before the final battle 12,000 years ago, indicating that the war between humans and Shadow Angels was nearing its conclusion. It was unclear why Fudo always seemed to predict everything, as if he had designed it himself. The military leadership was confident. Their new Archangels were now mass-produced. In the face of human intelligence, anything the Shadow Angels did seemed futile. Unbeknownst to them, the Shadow Angels shared similar thoughts. The Tree of Life was growing stronger, and the anticipated City of Angels was about to awaken. All Shadow Angels eagerly awaited this sacred moment. Although Sylvia stood with humanity, Sirius was still her brother, leaving her deeply conflicted. Apollo remained by her side, offering silent support to help Sylvia relax. The others were not as despondent as before. They reasoned that the worst outcome was destruction, so they might as well spend quality time with the person they cared about, even if it was just for a simple conversation. Deep down, they all knew that this calm was just the quiet before the storm. While Apollo and Sylvia were immersed in their primal desires, Sylvia saw a rose behind Apollo, indicating Sirius was nearby. The moment Apollo started to look for it, Sylvia disappeared. At the same time, the harvest snow broke through the barrier and descended upon the base. Touching the snow would cause flowers to bloom on the body. Pilots were humanity's last hope, and people risked their lives to protect them. However, Reika's shoulder was hit. Before their forces were completely overwhelmed, they had to take the offensive. Apollo, Reika, and Tsugumi merged into an Archangel, attacked the space portal, but were immediately repelled by a barrier. With Reika injured and Apollo distracted, Tsugumi had to take the lead. After merging again, a bolt of lightning from the portal engulfed the Archangel, but this also caused Tsugumi's heartbeat to quicken, helping her break through her limits and awaken a new skill. The space portal was shattered, and they were about to retrieve their comrade when the human leadership intervened. They sent dozens of new fighter jets through the portal. Reika realized they had been used. This was humanity's first counterattack against the Shadow Angels. They stormed into the enemy's stronghold, but were met with the first line of defense, hundreds of cherubim. Although the new fighter jets could overpower them in firepower, there were simply too many. Thus, they had to allow a few expendables to self-destruct to buy time for the rest to merge. Moroha, the war god of the Shadow Angels, possessed the hardest fists in the world, quickly destroying 2 human mechs. Seeing this, Glenn transformed into a battle angel, but he was now on the Shadow Angel's turf and soon found himself at a disadvantage. Meanwhile, Tsugumi, having depleted her energy, was swapped out with Pierre, and the 3 entered the space portal together. Upon entering, Reika immediately saw Glenn in a tough spot. Moroha's clone quickly fired a laser at Reika. Hearing Reika's voice, Glenn's self-awareness began to fight against the system. Moments later, he fully regained his humanity, rushing forward to shield Reika from the attack. He knew that Reika and the others were right, so he chose to stay behind and delay Moroha to buy time for his former comrades. Now, he was no match for Moroha, but for the sake of humanity's future, he chose to sacrifice his life. Apollo and the others took the opportunity to fly towards the palace. The scene below was shocking. The ground was littered with humans drained of their energy. Suddenly, Reika felt a sharp pain in her chest, knowing that Glenn had sacrificed himself. On one side, Rena predicted again that when the solar wing returns to the sky, the world will end. Sophia wondered if they could destroy the Shadow Angels. Fudo suggested that the Shadow Angels were merely avoiding humans and that both would perish if humans were extinct. However, destroying the Tree of Life would also doom humanity. Sophia questioned how Fudo knew so much and asked who he really was, but Fudo did not answer her. Meanwhile, Sylvia woke up from her slumber. Sirius continued to brainwash her. Although he had not regained his memories, he did not want to relive his past pain, so he brought her with him. He then took Sylvia to the Tree of Life, where she recognized the scene from her dreams, foretelling inevitable world destruction. At that moment, Apollo and his team flew up from below, instantly recognizing Sylvia's scent. Sirius was intentionally waiting for them, wanting to destroy their hopes personally. Reika, having lost Glenn, was determined to bring Sirius back this time. After the trio transformed into an archangel, their power matched Sirius's place performed. As the mechs locked in battle, a high-energy reaction was detected, and Toma, the mastermind behind everything, appeared. Toma then pinned the archangel to the wall with a spear of light, capturing the solar wing. However, Toma did not harm him, believing Apollo to be the reincarnation of his true love. This act was meant to awaken his memories. However, this also revived Celiane's remnants within Sylvia. Nonetheless, it mattered little, as this life Celiane was not the same as before. Her soul was split between Sylvia and Sirius, each having one wing. Upon hearing the truth, Sirius was stunned and unable to accept the outcome. Toma continued, explaining that the solar wing was actually the Archangel itself. 12,000 years ago, it had betrayed its wings, regenerated through human blood, and destroyed this place. Now killing Sylvia would atone for the solar wing's sins. However, they overlooked one thing. Sylvia was only half a reincarnation of Celiane, with the other half inheriting the solar wing. Otoha's power could not harm her, and was instead destroyed by Sylvia. But Toma's goal was to make Apollo experience pain, so he controlled Sirius's mech to stab Sirius's body. This was Sirius's most desperate moment. He realized that he had always been just a pawn for Toma. Killing him at the last moment was meant to shatter Apollo's spirit, making him feel the pain he once endured. However, Toma did not anticipate that an awakened Apollo could still force a merger. A divine light instantly healed Sirius's wounds. Yet, for some reason, in terms of combat power, Apollo and the Solar Wing were still no match. Toma toyed with him but did not deliver a fatal blow, as he needed Apollo to nourish the Tree of Life. At the same time, the Shadow Angels at the Elder Hall sensed the Tree of Life reviving. To hasten the process, they chose to sacrifice themselves. Their noble act caused the Tree of Life to grow into a towering tree instantly. Upon seeing this transformation, Toma ceased his actions, as the sacred fruit was about to form, about to fulfill the dreams of his entire race. But soon, he noticed the blossoming flowers beginning to wither. Toma was puzzled by this change. Before he could recover, Apollo took the opportunity to launch a surprise attack, knocking him to the ground, and then forcefully expelled him from the cherubim. Toma had completely lost his will to fight. The world was over, not just for the Shadow Angels, but also for humans. The Tree of Life, which had grown within the planet, now had its withering flowers spilling onto the surface. The power of death would spread everywhere, turning the land into a lifeless world. The human base suddenly detected a rapid increase in global fault distortions, indicating that massive crustal movements were imminent. Could this be the arrival of the apocalypse? Just then, the shadow of the solar wing appeared behind Apollo. He suddenly realized that the current archangel was not yet truly awakened, because even if the solar wing's wings were broken, it could not change its essence as a shadow angel. Thus, the addition of wings was necessary for the archangel to fully awaken. Immediately, Toma replaced Reika and piloted the Luna fighter jet towards the Tree of Life. Sirius, seeking revenge, also followed. However, their desire to act as the head prevented them from merging. At the last moment, Sylvia's soul appeared. Her gentle love brought them an unprecedented warmth. Then, using herself as a pivot, she linked the 3 fighter jets together. Sirius felt the pain he had once caused Toma as Celiane. Toma, as a shadow angel, experienced human emotions. In this way, the 3 set aside their racial grievances and achieved a fusion beyond any before. At this moment, the energy of the archangel could no longer be detected by devices. It radiated golden light, and the shadows of wings appeared above, with a sacred light illuminating the land. Then, Apollo's soul flew out, but unexpectedly, it was to bid a final farewell to Sylvia. To save their home planet, Apollo, Sirius, and Toma chose to use themselves as a link to connect the world's tectonic plates. The Earth became vibrant once again, and all humans previously drained by the Tree of Life were restored to normal.